Hi, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's podcast. I'm really excited to be hosting all of you. I think let's start with the intro. Let's just get the admin out of the way first. So I have this intro that I need to read. I'm sure by hopefully the fourth or fifth week, I'll be able to know it out of my head. But okay, yeah, it goes. So, welcome to the MyRehab Cafe video podcast, everyone. The MyRehab Cafe private and unsearchable or secret Facebook group is the aftercare branch of the MyRehab Group of Dual Diagnosis Addiction Centers, or ARC as it was formerly known. The MyRehab centers are private, inpatient drug and alcohol rehab centers that offer high quality healthcare with high quality outcomes. The MyRehab Cafe Facebook group has exclusive access to loads of content that isn't available on any of the MyRehab public channels. Some of the content includes workshops, lectures, and support groups hosted in conjunction with some of the treating providers at the MyRehab inpatient centers. These treating providers are psychologists, social workers, wellness counselors, and volunteers who have extensive experience in the field. Group members are also participate in movie and book reviews and from time to time face-to-face events. If you aren't a member of the MyRehab Cafe, you are likely watching this on a public channel. This means that you will have about 10 to 20 minutes of access to this live broadcast before we switch over to the exclusive private and unsearchable MyRehab Cafe Facebook group. Remember to sign up and join the MyRehab Cafe, guys, as this is where the interesting parts of the live video happens. The MyRehab Cafe is free to any person that has been through the MyRehab inpatient process. If you haven't been through the inpatient process, but you want to find out how to join the MyRehab Cafe, please check out the MyRehab Cafe website, which is www.myrehab.com. So that's www.myrehab.com. If you want to participate in this specific workshop, please join us via video or audio via the link in the comments section, or you can leave a comment and I should be able to bring it on screen and my guests can see, and we can see how we're going to answer your questions. If you are a MyRehab Cafe member and you want a higher degree of anonymity or confidentiality, please wait for us to end the broadcast on the public channel before hopping on or posting. I'll make an announcement when we're switching over from the public channel to the private channel. With that, let's get started. So this week, last week, let's maybe start with last week. Last week, we specifically looked a little bit we looked at boundaries, or we have been looking at boundaries. We've been looking at independence, sharing of responsibilities. So this week, we're going to divert off to a new topic that I'm quite excited about. And the topic is how to deal with resentments. I think this is quite relevant, specifically for those who are in their post-rehab journey, because most of those patients might be delving or starting to delve into step 4 of the 12 steps, which specifically also contains a section on resentment. I also find in my private practice that a lot of the patients that I deal with unfortunately struggle to navigate and process resentments. I think it's a very complicated, dynamic emotion. It is not something that we necessarily know how to deal with effectively. And I think it's something that, substances or not, basically affects most people. That most individuals will tell you that there is someone or a situation in the past that they really struggle to move on from, or struggle to find peace over. So that's something that we're going to look at a little bit today. So I'm going to ask Kirsty just to pull up the worksheet for us for today. Kirsty, I don't know if you have access to that. Great, thank you. And then I'm going to be between that screen. Again, I'm diverting my gaze over there because I have to read from that side. And then I also have notes here on my iPad that every now and again I will be looking at. So really apologies if my gaze is a little bit all over the place. So before we even start delving into the worksheet, or this one is basically coined a lecture, we are going to first have to unpack and understand what the word resentment means. And I think the reason being is that often when I ask patients the definition or their understanding of the word resentment, they often struggle to really tell me what it is. And there's a lot of confusion sometimes with other emotions like irritability and impatience. Resentment is generally a much deeper felt emotion, and as I said in the beginning, a little bit more complicated. So with few characteristic traits that is generally shared with the definition of resentment is firstly that a resentment is something that is generally set in the past. It's often not something that happened recently. It is often, patients will tell me, it's things that happened way back when. It can be 5 years, 20 years, 40 years for some even, or something that's relatively recent, but not necessarily yesterday or in the course of this week. So a resentment also doesn't have an expiry date. And what I mean by that is if you look at other emotions like grief, as an example, or trauma, those two emotions shares the same characteristic trait with resentment, that there is often a bit of a struggle in terms of there's no timeline necessarily. So us as psychologists or other mental health professionals can't necessarily put a timeline on when a person should have processed these emotions. We know that if these emotions are left unprocessed, they often become complicated emotions that takes a lot more time and a lot more processes to unpack. But at the end of the day, like I said, there is no expiry date. So patients will often tell me, it happened 20 years ago, this specific incident. But when I think about it now in the year 2020, it's as though it happened yesterday. It's still very raw. It still contains a lot of like raw emotions and feelings. So I can almost remember the details very vividly. So people would be able to tell me specifically where they were on that day, what they wore, what the other person was wearing, or even smells sometimes. So it has quite a strong link sometimes with trauma as well. But in essence, people would often say, it's been so long, and one would kind of consider, or people around me think that I should have been able to move past it by now, but I'm struggling to forget. I'm really struggling to move on. So I think that's important to note, is that it is generally something that is set in the past. Secondly, we generally say that, or patients will tell me if I ask them to describe resentment with another similar or synonym emotion, they would use words like hatred, a grudge, feeling of disgust. So that's really strong and intense emotions that often gets associated with resentment. So people would say, when I think of that person or when I think of that incident, I'm really filled with an emotion of hatred. And that's a very strong word, but like I said, those are the words that a lot of the patients use. Or others would say, it's really, I carry that grudge with me every single day. Or it's a feeling of disgust in my mouth, almost a bitterness when I think of that specific incident or that specific person that was involved in the incident. So those are some of the words or feelings that people harbor then. The other issue as well is that I often explain to patients that resentment, and you'll see it in the worksheet as well, resentment is very much linked with expectations. So it is either an action or a lack of an action. So people would say to me, if we give two practical examples, a patient might say, I'm really, really resentful towards my best friend because I shared a very deep, dark secret with my best friend in confidence. And a day or two later, she went and shared it with the rest of the group. So that is a direct action where a person would have the expectation that a best friend would keep a secret as such, but then breaking that commitment or that relationship, that loyalty, by going and sharing that secret with other people. On the other hand, a patient might say, I carry resentment towards my parents because I was quite an affluent athlete or soccer player or rugby player or cricket player, and they never bothered to come and watch any of my games, where my friends, I often saw their parents, on the field or on the court supporting them. So that would be a lack of an action. So it's not that the parents did something directly towards the child, but there's a lack of action that was taken. So again, both of them links with an expectation. The child had an expectation that his or her parents would actually, do the effort to come out to support them. We are going to talk about context later on, because obviously that is extremely important. We can't just necessarily for that patient say, it's valid. We need to try and ascertain and understand why the parents could possibly not be there to support him or her, so we'll get to that later. So like I said, an action or a lack of an action. Patients often ask me, but why after all these years am I struggling to move on from this? Maybe the person isn't even no longer in your life. Maybe there isn't any relationship anymore. Maybe, lots of people carry resentment towards ex-partners, although they have been remarried happily or have moved on to another relationship, or they are content being by themselves. Then they would say, I don't understand why this person or this situation randomly pops up into my mind so regularly. And generally we say that people struggle to forgive because you need 3 basic ingredients to be able to really forgive on an emotional level. These are ingredients that are needed for us as human beings to process if we feel that we've been wronged. So generally there is a lack of an apology, firstly. So the person that you feel might have wronged you have not yet truly apologized or authentically apologized. They might have said, I'm sorry, because they were asked to say sorry, or they might have not said sorry at all and maybe justify their behavior by saying that they don't believe that they did anything wrong. So generally there's a lack of an apology. There's also a lack of an explanation. So even though the person might not apologize, there is also not an explanation that puts context to the behavior of the person. So somebody might say, but I feel sorry that you are angry at me. However, I need you to understand that this was the circumstances at the time. This is why I took the decisions that I took, which obviously could help the other person understand a bit better, what played out at that time. Then also there is generally a lack of accountability. So that is more in situations where accidents happen, unexpected things happen. Obviously, we know of loads of people that carry resentment towards family members or themselves getting hurt by other individuals, maybe due to negligence or maybe even on purpose. And then they would say, but I feel like I can't move on or forgive because there wasn't ever really true accountability for this person. The person has been, there's no consequences attached to the person's behavior. So it feels almost to the person that carries the resentment as though they are the only ones that actually is dealing with the resentment at the end of the day. And that they are the only ones that's carrying any emotional or physical scars or trauma, and they feel that the other person kind of got off without any consequences. So those 3 main ingredients being missing in most cases, then obviously also makes it difficult for the person to actually move on and process their resentment. Then as well, patients would say, it really feels to me like I'm stuck or that I'm trapped. It feels to me that, it's basically a still standing emotion. I give an analogy to the patients to say that there's a golden rule that if you go hiking or camping, that you shouldn't be drinking from a still standing dam or river. Well, I guess it can't be a river if it's not moving, but let's say then still standing dam. And the reason being is because still standing water becomes toxic. So if it's not moving, if there's no flow, if there's no movement, then at the end of the day, that water actually becomes very toxic and you can't actually drink it. And much the same with something like grief, trauma, and resentment. They can all be stagnating feelings or emotions, which means when they stand still and they start to fester, it causes that bitterness and that toxicity that people feel, I almost feel poisoned from the inside. I feel like, I'm really carrying that bitterness with me every day, and it just becomes more and more because there's no movement and there's no flow to help process those emotions. So that's maybe just an analogy to think of, is that, your still standing emotions also become toxic, just like a still standing dam. So who would one say is more at risk for resentment? Because that is also something to look at. Some people would say, sure, that's not within my personality. I've had people wrong me and betray me and disappoint me, but I don't really allow myself to carry resentment. I tend to kind of look at the situation rationally or logically analyze it, and I try to move on from it as quickly as possible so that I don't carry that hatred with me. And then you get other people that would say, sure, I wish I could do that. I wish that was within my personality to just move on from things and let things go. But the more I try, the more I seem to be sucked in by those emotions again. So we often find a correlation between people who are more agreeable, and Ryan and I both have spoken about the big 5 personalities, and I mean there's loads of different personality tests, but agreeableness is where people tend to agree when they actually want to disagree. So although in their hearts or in their intuition they feel they don't agree with what the person is asking of them or what the person is saying, they would kind of just go with the motions and not resist, because they might fear conflict, or they might fear a fallout or rejection on the other hand. So people would say, I didn't really agree with this maybe financial decision that we took, or I didn't agree with, the decision that we took in the company, but I rather didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruffle any feathers or upset anybody. And I think that then eventually that person goes home with that feeling of, I don't actually agree with what just happened, but now I need to sit with it. And that's often when resentment starts building as well. So I guess resentment can also be if you went through one specific, very traumatic, unexpected incident with somebody, and also when it is something that repeatedly happened. So obviously, if somebody is putting you in a difficult position and you are just agreeing to that, the likelihood that you will be agreeing tomorrow and the next day and the next week to something else that you don't agree with might be high as well. So some people would say, I'm unfortunate that I still have to face the person I resent on a daily basis. So the resentment started a couple of years back or a couple of months back, but still till this day, I'm finding that I'm resenting this person because, there is disagreement, but that turns sometimes into that agreeableness. So that is not necessarily saying that exclusively people who are agreeable in nature tend to experience resentment. I think all of us are capable of resenting. But like I said, mostly we do find that people would say, sure, that time I should have stood up for myself. I should have said my say. I should have, voiced my opinion, but I didn't. And that brings me to the second point. And the worksheet will also highlight it, is that we can also resent ourselves. So it's not just about resenting other people, but it's also that we can carry self-resentment. And that is probably one of the hardest resentments to deal with, is to be able to forgive ourselves. So guys, I'm very sorry. Our time is up on the public channel. It goes by very quickly. Thanks for whoever was watching. Next time, please engage if you have any questions or so. It's good for me to have a bit of a break as well to gather my thoughts. But really, thank you for everybody that's watching. And then those who are moving with me to the private channel, thanks for you guys as well. I'll see you on there. And then I'll see the rest of you next week. Thanks.